Um, so, Paddy, can you share your screen?
I can. Um, okay.
So, while Paddy's getting himself set up, just to remind everybody
Right, yeah,
that um, this talk is being recorded as usual.
yeah.
That this talk is being recorded as usual. So you can, if you can, please keep your videos and your microphones turned off. Um, as usual, if you want to put questions to Paddy, use the chat function and they'll be passed on to me at the end. Now, as you all know, Paddy is probably the most enthusiastic speaker we're ever likely to get. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's a tad over the hour. Yeah, just a bit.
That's such a
Um,
very kind thing to say. Just before we start, sorry, can everyone see my presenter view or can everyone see my presentation? Because I'm not sure
We're
if I've made
seeing
a.
it, Paddy. We're seeing your presenter view rather than listening.
That is why I need to just change that around. Wait 1 second, because obviously I don't want everyone to know what I'm going to do next. Is that
Yeah,
better?
that's
that's
fine
it.
now.
Yeah.
Goodness me, it started off well.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Right. So, without any further ado, we'll pass over to Paddy from Oxford Archaeology, who's going to tell us some insights into the people who actually lived in Roman Britain, which makes quite a bit of a change from our usual subject matter, but very interesting nonetheless, I'm sure. Right, over to you, Paddy.
Oh, thank you very, very much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. This is so nice to be here. I think it's nice to be here. I hope everyone agrees. I'm kind of a bit shocked by the numbers that are watching this evening. So, please, honestly, if you have any thoughts or anything about what I'm going to tell you this evening, just email me much later because this is not what we're hoping for. So it's so lovely to digitally see everybody again. But this evening I'm going to talk. It's rather a passion project for me. So it's a bit of a litmus test to see if this works. So what I'm going to show you this evening is not necessarily thematically based, or it's not based in a way that you would sort of see in a book, for example, with chapters such as trade or industry or religion or all of these abstract concepts. Think of this as a smorgasbord of what I think is interesting and what I've discovered over the years of being an archaeologist, of what I think is interesting. Because ultimately, what I'm really, really interested in are the people. Because everything that we go and see, the Colosseums, the temples, all of these wonderful things, they wouldn't exist without human beings. And it's very easy sometimes to forget that human beings did most of this stuff because it's mostly hidden behind huge, what we call big data, which is the sizes of their features, the size of their ditch, how much pottery did they have. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to some of the, I don't know, some of the individuals from the past, but also some of the hidden people from the past as well. And I wanted to call this Populus, but then I saw that Guy de la Bedouere had just released a book called Populus. I thought, I do not want to be seen to be copying Guy de la Bedouere of all people. So I'm going to stick with it and I'm going to pretend that I never saw the other one. So let's start as we mean to go on, because as you all probably know, people have seen me speak before, will know that this is going to go on for rather a long time. So I hope you have your blankets. I hope you have coffee. I hope you're fully provisioned because we're going to be here till Christmas. So we start here. So I put this together because I just wanted to, it's kind of an FAQ thing, but also I wanted to frame the talk going forward because Roman Britain is a dichotomous region. It is not a real thing. There is no such thing as a single Roman Britain at all. Regional diversity is one of the strongest markers of Roman Britain. So it's incredibly difficult this evening to talk about Roman Britain. And I just want you to remember this in your minds that there was no singular place called Roman Britain. In fact, if anything, the province of Britannia was many different places, all within this island. And it's important also to just blow a few myths apart. So I often see, and I'm sure everyone often sees, and I'm sure there's many archaeologists in here that would agree with this, where we see this very outdated term that the Roman Empire was a machine. And it was not a machine. For the most part, with the evidence that we do have available, it was chaotic nearly all of the time. The imperial state reacted to a lot. They were inefficient for the most part. They were massively exploitative, and every region of the Roman Empire was distinctively local. It was purely their local background, their local population, their local cultural DNA with a veneer of things on top. Now, I've used this before. For example, I don't know, I use a mobile phone that was made in China. I drive a German car. I live in a house built in the Fens, which I'm not originally from. So all of these things, but none of them make me who I am. I am still the person I am. You see what I mean? So if we talk about the general population levels, in Roman Britain, it's been estimated that there's about 2 to 4 million people at the height of the 2nd century. I think actually it's a bit of an underestimation. I think there's probably a few more people living in Roman Britain. And the population share is actually quite interesting because nearly 90% of the people, of those millions of people, lived in the countryside. They lived and worked in the countryside. And you do get mixing together. And then in the urban development, it's around 6.5% of that population would have lived in an urban society of any kind, or of an urban development. And then military, which is the strongest apparently signifier of Roman Britain, and it's one of the biggest money makers, if you like, of talking about Britain in the Roman Empire, is the military, is the army, and it makes up something in the region of 3.5%. Now, they are very broad figures. Obviously, ultimately, we can't test any of this. There's no census. They're all dead. So there's not a lot we can do. We can usually just sort of, I don't know, come up with this idea based on a lot of different holistic evidence strains. And then something else that's actually quite interesting that we need to think of is, what did the Romans do for us? And quite seriously, not a whole lot at the beginning. So it's no evidence whatsoever at the moment, no evidence whatsoever for any complete landscape change. So it's not like the Norman invasion of the 11th century, where we start to see distinctive changes in the landscape that are far-reaching and literally change the socio-political landscape as well as the physical landscapes of the island of Britain. There's not a really massive change. What we tend to see is continuation. Continuation in landscapes is the biggest thing, and intensification. So not change. It's not revolution. It's more of an evolution. And then everything else, some of the things are just talking about generally what I'm going to be talking about a little bit further. So the biggest question I get asked quite a lot on things like site tours and everything else, and I think it's something really, really important that we need to talk about, because everybody has different ideas. And the ultimate question is, who were the Romano-British? What kind of people made up that population level of between 2 to 4 million people? Well, I think personally, my own thought is, and a lot of you will know this lady, is I think the best symbol of Roman Britain is this lady, Regina, or Regina. Now, this obviously, as you know, is a very famous tombstone, and it's in South Shields at the moment. And it says, Dis manibus Regina Liberta. She's a freed slave and wife of Barates, the Palmyrene. So he's Syrian, and she is Natione Catavalorna. She's from Essex, which is quite interesting on its own. And she was 30 years old, as it says just here. Now, at the very bottom of this, and written in very, very proficient Aramaic, is Regina, wife of Barates, alas. Basically, that's what it means. It means that's Barates, his own kind of inflection on this. And I think she symbolizes what Roman Britain is. It is a kaleidoscope of cultures. Now, often a word that's thrown around is Romanization. And I don't know whether or not everybody does this, but we're tending to try and keep away from the term Romanization now, because it's a very easy term to use, but we all need to be very clear about what it actually means. I prefer the terms cultural entanglement, because Romanization kind of removes the agency of the people that already lived here. And Regina is even more interesting when we actually look at everything that her tombstone is telling us. For example, the artistic style of the sculpting itself is Palmyrene. It's very, very similar to what they would find in Palmyra. So it already suggests that there's some people living in the north of Britain that are very well versed, perhaps even from Syria, that are very well versed with this artistic style. We don't, of course, know what Regina thought of any of this. We don't know if she had a hand in designing this tombstone at all. Remember, she was a liberta, she was a freed slave, and Barates had married her. What's really interesting that I like really a lot is that she's wearing a torque, which at this period, around the 2nd century, where this was created, torques were actually a bit anachronistic. They weren't really worn as much, we believe, by the physical population. But it's generally thought that she's wearing this as a symbol of her nativeness, as a symbol of where she comes from, because it is a very important symbol of power and authority. And I love this because it is placed cheek by jowl with what the Romans saw, which is just here, the loaded distaff and spindle and the wicker basket. That is what the Roman imperial ideology of what a perfect woman was, which was to sit at home and to spin and to weave, this rustic matronly virtue that they had. But she's also she's a kaleidoscope of culture. So, for example, the ruffled neck garment she's wearing on the side. It's a feature of a very distinctive Celtic sleeve tunic, usually worn in artistic circles, iconographically attested to, from the middle of the Rhine, in the middle of the 1st century AD, around the area of Mans. And then it's kind of all of it's pretty self-explanatory, as I've written on. So I think she's a really good symbol of what Roman Britain is. Roman Britain is just a melting pot of lots of different stuff. But the thing is that makes Roman really distinctive is that it happens in quite a relatively short amount of time in archaeological terms. Well, what about this man? Is he a Romano-Briton? He was found in Offord Cluny in Cambridgeshire by Mola Headland not very long ago, and they did aDNA on this single burial, and it was found that he was from an area comprising Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and parts of southern Russia, and would have spoken a Middle Iranian dialect. He died between 18 to 25, and his carbon-dated remains were from the early 2nd century to roughly the early 3rd century. And what's really interesting about this, people that know their Roman history, is that in around 175 AD, Marcus Aurelius defeated a Sarmatian army on the northeastern border of the Roman Empire, because Marcus Aurelius obviously was the philosopher, but he could also kick some major ass as well.
Paddy,
yeah?
Paddy, sorry, mate, but can you make sure you keep looking at your microphone? Your bandwidth's gone down, and you need to focus on the microphone more. Every time you're looking away, we're losing the sound. Sorry, mate.
Okay, I will keep still.
As much as you ever can.
I will absolutely keep still. Damn, this puts paid to my entire river dance routine that I was going to do for everybody. Okay, so in AD 175, Marcus Aurelius, and Cassius Dio mentions that he sent around 5,000 of these Sarmatian cavalrymen to Britain. So it is entirely possible, if we go back, it's entirely possible that this young man was part of that Sarmatian detachment sent to Britain. So what does that mean? Is he a Roman Briton, therefore? Is he a Roman living in Britain? Therefore, we found him in Britain. Technically, he is a Romano-Briton. And again, it's kind of an encapsulation. But I think another summation of these people, comes from this wonderful place called Vindolanda in the north. And of course, it's rightfully one of the most famous sites in all of Roman Britain. But I also would just like to say, when we use the word site, I actually really don't like using the word site very much, especially on archaeological projects, because we tend then to forget that these weren't sites to these people, they were places. They were living, dynamic, breathing places. They were their lives. They were the infrastructures of their lives. And we're going to go to the most famous Vindolanda tablet found at Vindolanda. Of course, I'm not going to wax lyrical about the Vindolanda tablets too much, because I'm not going to focus a lot on the military. And this is one of the most famous ones found. And this is a birthday invitation. Now, the birthday invitation, obviously, is from Claudia Severa to her Lepidina. And it was a couple of weeks ago, I think her birthday was. On this, the 3rd day of the Ides of September, sister, for the celebration of my birth, I happily ask that you will come and make the day sweeter for us. The day by your coming will be made. We don't know what it will be made, but we can imagine it will be pretty good if she turns up. And then it's say hello to my Cerialis, my Elias, and my little son give greetings. I will hope to see you, sister. Farewell, sister, soul dearest to me as I live and breathe, and hail. Now, that is a really poignant thing because we can really read into this single birthday invitation, and it's rightfully famous. But if we just pick it apart a little bit and just look at what we know about the social mechanics of the Roman military during this period in the early second century, is that Claudia Severa is probably a very young girl. She's probably in her early 20s at the most, and as is Lepidina. And she's probably been married to Cerialis, this military commander, and she's been removed from her home somewhere in the Roman Empire, somewhere else, and brought to Britain. It's very, very likely that this is the case. But what we are seeing in the right northernmost province of their empire, literally the end of their world, we are seeing these two young women grasping onto a normal life. They are making the very best of this. And this invitation is really special for another reason. And it's this to the bottom right hand corner, as you can see. And it says, just there, and it says, I will hope to see you, sister. Farewell, sister soul dearest to me as I live and breathe, and hail. Now, I want to show you, of course, that you can see the rest of this is written in a very clear, well-written cursive hand. It's almost certainly written by a scribe or a slave. But this bit has been added in her hand, and it's actually the earliest known handwriting from a woman in the entire Roman world. And that is something that I think is a very special thing, because obviously Claudia Severa probably had no idea we would ever even see this. And the thing is, they are Roman Britons. They are Roman Britons. But if we'd have just found the wood, for example, or we'd have found a bit of pottery, for example, we wouldn't have known this color, this detail, this kind of special chance vicissitude, this little whiz bang of wonder that these people can give us. But interestingly, what about the people that actually lived in Britain or actually came from Britain? Do we know anything about them? And we do know a little tiny bit, other than the obvious, other than their cultural persuasion or looking at the Iron Age, for example. We do know some of their names. This is a little pendant found at Sulis in Bath, the temple to Sulis. It's part of the curse tablet phenomenon, and it's probably a curse, but on it are written some names. And I'm not going to try and say them out loud, but I think we should all have a go at doing this to yourselves, obviously, because I did try when I was putting this together. I did try and sound these out, and I can't pronounce them at all. But even if you do say them, the way that your mouth moves when you say them out loud, like Diana and Deida, they sound incredibly. I don't know. The word I suppose is Celtic. They sound incredibly Celtic to me, and I really love these because these are probably real Roman Britons. They're probably people with real Brittonic names, such as Andigan, for example, or Vindurix. These wonderful, wonderful names. And the problem is, of course, they obviously weren't very nice people because they were cursed. So we know them simply because they probably were bad apples, or they did something to elicit someone's ire. And then, of course, we go all the way back down to the south. We go back to London, and sometimes we can get part of their names. And usually, people with the name beginning with B are kind of provincial in their own name. And this is Belcianus. And Belcianus, or Belicianus, has just practiced writing his name over and over again in a tile. He's just practicing writing his name, and you can see he's doing really well. And it's ever in the endeavor to just be idle, and he's just practicing writing his name, Belicianus, Belicianus, Belicianus. And then, of course, he wants to round it off with a flourish with Belicianus. He just wants to tell posterity who he is. But then, of course, what we do get is some of these tiles are quite interesting. And all this is just to introduce you to some of these wonderful characters, I suppose, that we know nothing else about. But sometimes we don't need to know anything about them. We just need to appreciate that it exists in the first place, because it helps to color our interpretation of big archaeological data, that we constantly need to remember that these are human beings. And this is an incredibly human tile, So as you can see, this is a Roman tile. This was found in London, and you can still see it in the Museum of London. You can go and have a look, and it's on it written, it says, Australis debus tradicim, vagator sib cotidim. Now, of course, it sounds like rhyming meter, and it says Australis debus tradicim. Australis goes off every 13 days, and then it's off by himself. Now, what's really wonderful about this is that recently somebody's done a study on this, because at first it thought maybe it was a rhyming meter or a song or something else, Australis debus tradicim, vagator sib cotidim. And it sounds interesting. It sounds wow. I don't know. It kind of rolls off your tongue. It's almost Shakespearean. However, someone's recently done a study where they've noticed that there are two different hands writing this, and it's Australis debus tradicim, Australis for the last 13 days, and then someone else has written underneath, goes off by himself. So what it seems to be is that the workers in this tile kiln, Australis is probably saying Australis for the last 13 days has made X amount of tiles, which is actually quite common. But somebody else, maybe like I've written there, an anonymous cantankerous co-worker or somebody that didn't like Australis, has written on it, he's basically dobbed him in. And he's written on the back of it, Vagator sib cotidim, that he's wandered off by himself, which means he's probably not doing any work and he's wandering off. But what I think is wonderful, I don't think that the rhyming or the meter is accidental. I think it's entirely on purpose. But it's not something you would see in an average brickie today. They're not writing each other poetry today. And I think it's such a wonderful, we don't know anything else other than this. We don't know anything else about Australis. He just flashes out of the past and then immediately goes dark again. So that's kind of the introduction, if you like, of what makes a Romano Britain. And the thing is, people from all over the empire made Romano Britons. People from everywhere made Roman Britain what it was. So we keep that in our mind all the time, that they are not just people. It is a metropolitan place. And generally speaking, in the ancient world, people didn't really move around all that much, not as much as we constantly try to imagine. Generally speaking, people would stay quite close to where they were. A lot of ADNA analysis has shown that a lot of people from cemeteries, very few of them really come from quite far away. A lot of them are related. For example, in Cambridge very recently, ADNA was done on a Saxon cemetery, and there was a Roman cemetery either nearby or on the same site, and they did ADNA and they found that they were actually related. So you've got people from the Anglo-Saxon period related to people living on the landscape in the Romano-British period, but they wouldn't have known. So also, there's something else we probably need to say. They would not know that they were Roman Britons. If you said, well, it's like Monty Python, where King Arthur tells them he's their king, and they've got no idea they had a king in the first place. I think very much so, a lot of people would be pretty nonplussed that they were Romano-British if we called them that. And speaking of Australis, and speaking of people with these singular names, another population of people that we really need to kind of think about are slaves. Because slaves, it's one of the most common questions I get asked about Roman sites, for example, or sites where we find the built environment, such as buildings or something. A lot of people have some very strong views about people of servile status. So let's just have a look at the current data of what we know about slaves. And it's actually quite astonishing and it's a little bit upsetting. So modern statistics suggest that 7 to 10% of the total population of the entire Roman Empire were slaves or of servile status. Between 5 to 8 million people living in the Roman Empire were slaves, or of people of much lower status, of servile status. So where we get the word serve from, to serve somebody, servile. In Britannia, it's pure guesswork. We just have not the material evidence in any way. But if we apply that similar kind of algorithm, it could be suggested, for example, that on a population of 3.5 million people, perhaps as many as 350,000 people could have been slaves of some kind. Now that's interesting because Cassius Dio, of course, talks specifically about Britain is exporting slaves. It's one of their major exports when the Romans first arrive. It's slaves, it's human chattel, which it's quite an upsetting thing to think about. And of course, if we're looking at the Roman inscriptions of Britain database, only 13 inscriptions contain the word servi or servus, and that's over several thousand inscriptions. Slave is encountered, the word slave is encountered 68 times, 41 from Vindolanda, which, by the way, are a complete chance find, but they only highlight a little tiny bit of something that would have been much, much bigger. And then 12 tablets from the Bloomsburg excavations in London, which were recently published by Roger Tomlin, which are extraordinary. If you can get hold of it, read them because they're rather wonderful. They're centered around the 1st century. And you also get some associated just after the Boudicca Revolt, for example, where London is back to normal, it's back to thriving. And then 61 inscriptions concern the word freedman and 4 freed women. So what we can see from this is slavery was absolutely part of the reality of the Roman imperial project in Britain, but it was also part of the reality of the pre-Roman Iron Age. We know that absolutely for sure. We know that that is the case. And you get these bound captive little statues. They're fast becoming a lot more popular. People are finding more of them. And of course, as his archaeological interpretation goes, we have to say things like, well, it could be. But it could mean several things. But to me, that looks like a bound captive is slave. And it's all about supplication. It's all about humiliation with the Romans. It's part of their worldview. It's to humiliate their opponents. It's the very, I don't know, it's kind of part of their zeitgeist, if you like. It's all about intimidation by captivity. And then what about actual material remains? And this is actually quite an awful one. This is a gang collar. Or rather a slave collar, and it's where, as you can see, people were attached by the neck and then marched in line. But what I love most about this, if you can obviously just bear with me, it's not that I love this, I just need to say that it's simply because it was found in Anglesey, and it dates around the 1st century AD, and it was found in a watery context on Anglesey, and it seems to be a druidic response, perhaps, because it was the home of the Druids at this point, we think, anyway. It's a response by that local community to Roman imperial power. They're throwing these things to the depths of water, if you like. So already, this is probably from the army, and this is probably how they collected captives to be sold into slavery. And we do need to remember that this is kind of an awful, awful thing, and that people really did exist that would go through this horrific experience. And even more damning of this, for example, I think another company called Albion Archaeology recently discovered a couple of years ago, I think, a burial that had been interpreted as being crucified, which was something that was solely given to people of slaves or treasonous. And it's one of the only examples found, I think, archaeologically. So Albion Archaeology, well done. That was an absolute wonderful piece of work. But that kind of thing, we are finding more and more all the time. Archaeologists across all the country are finding more and more, such as this one, which was Great Casterton in Rutland, not very far from me. It dates from the 3rd to the 5th century. And this was a burial that had been shackled. He'd been buried and shackled. And he'd been placed outside of the main cemetery, which again is a part, we call it a deviant thing, where it's outside of that. But I don't want to concentrate on these kind of things too much. And I'm really trying not to move very much. I don't know if any of you can see me, but I am fixed towards this camera. I'm looking directly at you. So this is something that's really, really poignant, actually. It's direct evidence for slavery in Roman Britain. And it correlates very, very well with other examples found in the temperate European provinces, such as Germany and Gaul as well. It's kind of awful. This is a receipt for a girl. Basically, it was found in London, and it says, now this also, I know you're probably reading this now, so I'll explain it as I go. But what you can see is this shows just how complex and almost bewildering that this level of people of servile status actually was. So this is Vegetus. He's the assistant slave of Montanus, who was the slave of the August Emperor, was the slave of the Emperor, and sometime, wait for it, assistant slave of Eacundus. So you've got these slave of a slave who's sometimes the assistant slave of another slave, who's part of another slave, who's part of this big network of slaves. And we know that during the Principate period, that slaves and freed people, or freedmen as they were called, they were a vital part of the socio-political landscape in Rome itself. For example, Claudius had his very, very famous slave palace, and Narcissus as well. They were his freedmen, and they basically ran the empire itself. In place of Claudius. But what we do know that slaves were kind of given this kind of power. But what's really awful about this is the girl Fortunata. So, or by whatever name she is known. So first of all, they give her the name Fortunata, which is quite a common slave name. Fortunata, which means obviously lucky, which is probably the most ironic thing ever put down. Or by whatever name she is known. So it's a completely legal contract, or by whatever name she is known. By nationality, a Diblintian, so she's from the European mainland, from Albicianus for 600 denarii. Now that is a lot of money. That equates to quite a lot of cash. And that the girl in question is transferred in good health. She's warranted not to be liable to wander or run away, which are very, very common formulae you find in these kind of things. In fact, another one has recently been found, I think, in Benelanda, and it's been recently transcribed, and it's something very, very similar for a male slave. But that if anyone lays claim to the girl in question or to any share in her, so again, it shows you that slaves could be held by several different people, which is, again, it's an awful thing. These are human commodities. In the wax tablet is which she is written and sworn by the genius of the Emperor Caesar, which again, it's normal formula. But this, in a stroke, this single tablet gives us the name of people that were living in London at this period, all heavily invested in the transcribance and sale of a single girl from Europe who was probably very, very young, who was brought to Britain and sold in a market, or sold to at some part of upper class market. And I think it's a very poignant reminder that this kind of thing did happen, and it happened quite a lot. And then it goes even further into that. So recent analysis of some heads and some other bits of human remains found in London were submitted for ADNA analysis. And 10 male crania recovered from a large shallow pit in London, dated between AD 125 to 200. They were aged between 36 to 45. They had strong signs of dental disease, which is actually quite common in Roman burials. Episodes of compromised health during childhood, again, given diet, given a lot of the other things, especially people of an urban environment, you would tend to find this quite a lot. It's not really that. In fact, you'd find this quite a lot in burials all the way up to the modern age. And there's still parts of the world where this would be the case. Periods of ill health, anemia, a heavy parasite load. There's a wonderful journal article about parasites, which again sounds like an oxymoron, but it is really interesting. And compromised nutrition, again, it shows a little bit more. And what's really poignant about this is you've probably already seen. It's these were subjected to, basically they were beaten to death with huge blows all over the face. So, for example, this one here in the eye socket, you can see it's been hit so hard, he's basically broken his eye socket. And this one again, in these awful, awful blunt force injuries to their faces. And then they were buried on purpose together, just the heads. Now, it's not known, of course, the status of these people, but taking all of the evidence into one, it could be military, for example, but then it's in an urban environment, it might be a bit weird, but they could be slaves, or they might likely to be slaves. But also it shows that there is a very real possibility of physical violence. So these people are very similar to us in so much as they've got emotions and we laugh and they've got a sense of humor and all of these wonderful things that we can associate psychologically with these people. We also need to remember that they are living in a very different world. And it's often been said that the past is a foreign country. Well, for most of the time, what we see in archaeology is that the past is actually a completely different planet. So what we tend to see with this, and what might be interesting about these as another interpretation, they might be the results of warfare, but there's no real evidence of deskinning, but it might have been that they were trophies and then they were buried ceremoniously somewhere, because of course it might fall into that British thing of trophies. But we know that, of course, after the reign of Hadrian, that there was a lot of problems in Roman Britain. So it could be something with this, or they could be slaves. Ultimately, all this really means is these were human beings that lived in Roman Britain. They were the people of Roman Britain. And another population that isn't really often thought about are children. Now, we know that, for example, I say we know, it's a very common misconception. It's probably not amongst the learned people here, but it's a very common misconception that the Romans didn't really engage with children or childhood very much, like childhood is a Victorian invention. But we actually have much more evidence to suggest that it's exactly the opposite. For example, there's a famous quote by Cicero, the wonderful statesman. I say the wonderful statesman. He was just a bit of an arrogant dickhead, to be perfectly honest. He did, he complained an awful lot, and he didn't really like anybody else that was below his staff or below his status or anything else. He didn't like his slaves very much, and he just wasn't a very nice man. But there's a very famous quote by Cicero that said, "If an infant in the cradle dies, the survivors ought not to," I think he said something like, "utter a complaint," which isn't an awful thing to say. And it's been taken as that as gospel for many, many years after that. And it's kind of used a lot. It's rolled out a lot to support this kind of idea. But the thing is, it's different to this. So, for example, we know that in the Roman period, infant mortality for the first month, including fetal deaths and stillbirths and things like that, was approximately about 8%, which is an astonishing number in any metric at all. And even worse, it's believed that close to 30% of all babies born would die in their first year. So, of course, it breeds this sense of what we would perceive as detachment. But in Britain, we see this much, much stronger now. So, for example, I've showed you several of these gravestones, these epitaphs that we see. This is, for example, Simplicia Florentina, a most innocent soul who lived 10 months. Her father, Felicius Simplex, made this, and he was a centurion of the 6th Legion Valeria Victrix, and that was found in York. So already we're seeing that they're commemorating their children already, because of course they are human beings, and it is the worst possible feeling. I've got, it must be. And she lived a sweetest, torn away no less suddenly than the partner of Dis. So, for example, the one on the bottom left, which is found near Lincoln, this one here, this actually incorporates several mythological themes from ancient Greece as well, to mourn their fate of their 9-year-old, for example. And then we get this stone at the top right-hand corner, which is a really, really poignant one. It's probably one of my favorite ones. It's Filius or Filio, which is son or daughter, and it was found at the Turk Dean. And if you want to look for it, it's Roman Inscriptions of Britain. It's RIB 3068, and perhaps it marked the grave of a child who died before they could be named, which is around 8 to 10 days. Then they would wait. It shows you the poignancy of this. They would wait for about 8 to 10 days before they would name the child, simply because of the worry about the child passing away, of some kind of congenital problem or anything else. And then we also hear stories, of course, about children with disfigurements, or children that are born not physically able, or they're born with mental incapacity, or any form of this, that are then exposed, for example, and infanticide and everything else. And there's actually very little direct evidence for this whatsoever in terms of infanticide. And even more, there's direct evidence for children with physical ailments or physical problems actually being cared for and looked after and commemorated. So this is the Arrington burial. This was found just outside Cambridgeshire, near Wimpole, and it dates from 130 to 160, and it was the remains of a child buried in a lead coffin. And this child was 10 to 11 months old. It's got obviously to be completely normal. And the head was actually the size. He or she suffered from hydrocephalus, which is where their head was a massive part of their body. So it was much more out of proportion to the rest of the body. It was about the size of a 4-year-old. And it can be caused by embryonic disorders in development stage, or by trauma at birth, or by infection. And what's interesting about this is this little baby was buried with all sorts of things to keep it safe in the afterlife, and to make sure that it was going to go and have a wonderful life after death. And what's wonderful about this, again, is that preserved text files and aromatic resin found from inside it, from things like items of clothing, maybe the swaddling clothes or something, and items of food that were found in this, actually come from small scrubby trees that were native to the Mediterranean and the Levant. So maybe the child's parents, if they do ADNA on this in this burial, for example, came from the wider empire themselves, and they buried their child in Britain. So automatically, you know, of course, they're a Roman Britain. And I really like that because I actually excavated the site, which was about 120 meters from this, as in the creation of the car park at Wimpole Hall in 2018, and we found quite a large agricultural rural settlement dating to around this period. And we know there's a villa nearby and everything else. So it's nice to be able to contextualize that data a little bit more. So these are some of the things that were found with this individual. And there are lots and lots of things to completely safeguard, like this little votive of a ram. And now rams are very, very common in Roman art in iconographical terms. They are commonly the symbol of the god Mercury. So it could be something to do with that. And there's the mother goddess, of course, to the right, to ensure that this child is always taken care of. And then we have some of these busts that they don't quite know who they are, but all we really need to know is that they've really taken care, these pipe clay figurines, to make sure that this child is absolutely well looked after. And it's not just children that these people loved, it's also their pets. Okay, so this is just a small example of this. This was actually found just last year by our company, a site in Essex, and it is a dog burial. And what's really interesting about this dog burial, it's about the size of a spaniel, and this dog had been cared for quite a lot. Not cats. Now, this is just to say, I know there's going to be several people in here that are cat people. First question is why? And second question is dogs are better, so cats, why? And the Romans shared the same attitude for much of the period. There's not, for example, there are hundreds of examples of names of the pets of dogs from all of the Roman world, but there's not a single one for a name of a cat. Cats were domesticated. They came into Roman Gaul in the 1st and 2nd centuries BC from the Middle East, but they weren't really known as pets so far that we know, but dogs certainly were. And this is one of the leg bones of the dog, and it had suffered rather a nasty break at some point in its life, and it had been cared for. And you can see the repair of this break on the leg. And you can see that it definitely, this kind of break would have rendered it incredibly uncomfortable, and it wouldn't have been able to walk. So the human beings that looked after this had clearly cared for this animal very, very much. And they really looked after this animal, and they wanted to look after its well-being. And I know it doesn't really mean much, and it isn't really as good as a mosaic or a Roman fort or a Roman road or a villa or something else. But this is the stuff that really, really excites me. It's these little tiny bits that really gives us an insight into these people who lived in a very violent and awful world for the most part, but they still loved their animals, and they still maintained emotional relationships with each other and with their animals. And then we finished with that small section with this burial of a child. Her name is, I'll show you. Her name is Atola. Now, what's really interesting is from what this tombstone says, and this was found at Corbridge, so if there's anyone from Corbridge, a lot of the stuff we find in terms of epigraphy comes from the Roman North, because it's more of a military tradition than anything else. So as you go further south, things of written evidences, such as epigraphy or tombstones or wax tablets or any of that sort of thing, begins to lower quite a lot in volume as you go further south. And it's not to suggest they're not literate, it's just to suggest that people, a militarized community, are much more on board with the Roman traditional way of commemorating the dead, for example. So, and I really love this one. In fact, it's one of my favorite things from all of Roman Britain, because the art style, first of all, is incredibly, well, the best word for it, I suppose, is Celtic, isn't it? It's incredibly Celtic. You can see it's got enlarged head, enlarged shoulders, and I will come to something a bit later on, and there will be a test at the end to see if you remember Tole, because it comes in again later in a mosaic. So I really like this one because Tola is her nickname, because she's properly called Velibia, who lived most happily, and you can see it there, felicissime, most happily for 4 years and 60 days. So to the spirits of the departed, Sir Uranus, her dad, probably her dad, set it up to Atola. And I really like that because it shows that these children also had nicknames, and she lived most happily. And you can almost, I don't know about anyone else, but you can feel the emotional pain of this. You can actually feel it. And there's some interesting epigraphic things going on here, like Diebus, these bits at the end, for example, are actually added on later. But you can also see that we can sort of assume that this might be Vilibia herself or Atola. And it's probably playing with her ball or something. You know, she's probably got a toy or something. And I think that is a wonderful thing. Now, as a field archaeologist, okay, there is a massive majority of people, and I'm sure there are many people in here that know a lot about archaeology of the rural landscape. What about the 90%? Because everybody I've shown you so far mostly arrive from the 6.5% club of the urban dwellers, or the 3.5% of the militarized community or people associated with the military. Okay, what about everybody else, the 90%? They are the people that I, day to day in my job, deal with. Now, the Romans introduced a lot of things to Britain in terms of food, for example. This is just a small list of everything the Romans introduced to Britain. They diversified diet, okay, in a massive way. And they also cultivated fruits and native to Britain that the British didn't really want to eat in the first place. So we've got apples, asparagus, almonds. I missed out the A, I'm sorry. So it's not almonds, it's definitely almonds. Pears, plums, damsons, cherries, which come from Armenia, walnuts, leeks, cucumbers, cabbage. They could have kept cabbage, to be perfectly honest. Lettuce, turnips, Baldric would have been happy. Parsnips, herbs, again, such as dill, parsley, coriander, summer savory, grapes, olives, sweet chestnuts, pheasants, peacocks, doves, guinea fowl, rabbits, dormice, snails, and chickens. Although chickens were part of the Iron Age world, but in very, very rare, and they're probably continental imports anyway. And then plus many, many more species of trees and other plants. And yet that never comes up when the question is, what did the Romans do for us? And we're in the right place here when they rightfully or wrongfully, in fact, incredibly wrongfully, when people say they brought roads to Britain. As I'm sure everybody knows, it's completely not true. They didn't do that. But these are the things that they did, and they diversified the diet on rather a long way. Now, it's often thought, for example, that for the most part, that how did they change agriculture? And remember when I said in the very beginning that there's no real evidence for a massive landscape change as a result of Roman annexation. And what we tend to see is intensification of things. So the arable world of farmers, because farmers or agricolae, agricola is the Roman word for farmer or field dweller. And it was his nomen, which is his name for the famous governor, of course, of Britain from the late 1st century AD, Agricola. But Agricola is the word for a farmer. And a lot of the time, farmers are the people that made up most of any province in the Roman world. In fact, all the way up until the post-medieval period, until the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, farming was everything. Agriculture was absolutely everything. And it's been thought, you would probably think, that the Romans would bring in lots of different types of crops, lots of different technologies, lots of different things into Britain to, with all their knowledge that they had of the agricultural world, from the Mesopotamian world, from the Mediterranean world, from the Greco-Roman world. Not really, not at all, because the Iron Age people already had a pretty good sophisticated way of working before the Romans turned up. The Romans didn't have to do a lot. So the arable farming in Britain was a continuation of what we see in the Iron Age. But what we tend to see is expansion. We tend to see an intensification in areas that were under crop, an increase of scale because they needed surplus to pay something in the later period called the annona, which is the tax for the army. It's payment in kind of grain, something we're not going to go into now, but it's very, very interesting. And with various levels of specialization of certain crops that they would look at. For example, we know that they probably cultivated cannabis in Britain as well. Their main crops would have been spelt wheat and barley. Look at any environmental sample, and if there's commercial archaeologists here, will know exactly what I'm talking about. You do any environmental sample, if you've got good preservation, you will get duckweed, which shows that there's water in these things, because of course there is. You'll get spelt wheat, which the Romans really like. They made beer out of it, and it grows very well in wet environments. And some of you are from Britain, and you know just how wet and awful it can be here. And barley. Barley was one of their main staple things, and of the major cultivated cereals in Britain. Emmer wheat as well is something that we see, but it descends. It's on a descending curve. Now, why have I talked so much about farming? Because they are the people that made up almost all of Roman Britain. Okay, everything we see in books and everything else are very, very, very small, microcosmic things. Farmers made up the biggest part of Britain. But they also did lots of other things. They were very much so Johannes Factotum. They were jack of all trades. They would do all sorts of stuff. And there's a pottery specialist, for example, called Adam Sutton. And recently he was postulating this really wonderful idea that farmers actually made most of the pots and most of the crafts and did most of the things in rural Roman Britain that we tend to think of as specialisms for the most part. It was actually farmers mostly doing these things on maybe on a small domestic scale. I'm not talking about things like the New Forest potteries or the Black Burnishware potteries or the Nene Valley potteries, which were specialists. But I do think I want to bring farmers back to the front of our archaeological imagination because they're always there. And then their routine was still exactly the same. It would have been autumn sowing, sickle harvesting, crop processing. All of this stuff would have been exactly the same in the Iron Age, and it just took place in the Roman period. And instead, this time they were going home to their roundhouses, and they might have their dinner from a Samian plate, for example, or buy themselves a new brooch at the local market. So, and most of them lived in places like this. And we are fast developing our knowledge of rural landscapes. And they would live in these dense, and I mean these are really dense landscapes. So this is from the claylands around St Neots and into Bedfordshire and into upwards into Cambridgeshire as well. So this is Wintringham Park, where we would find temples, and these are roundhouse developments and everything else that you would see down here. This is what it looks like from the ground. You can see the roundhouses there as we dig them. The darkness of these features they represent, or rather they reflect, the intensity of occupation. The darker the feature, the more stuff people are throwing in there, the darker and not organic it is. But just to give you an idea of scale of these kind of developments, of these people living here and how sophisticated they were, these are 3 or 4 sites. And just to give you some idea of scale, that's modern St Neots. So that is a modern house, for example, in terms of comparative scale. So look at the sheer size of this thing. It is massive, and we know that this is taking place all the way through Roman Britain to the south, the central belt. There are huge regional variations in certain things, but generally speaking, the length of breadth of intensive occupation, for example, is enormous, absolutely enormous. And also Martin Millett from the University of Cambridge has been doing some wonderful work on mapping using geophysics in the north of Britain, and it looks something very similar. So these are on what we call the claylands. This is my kind of stomping ground, if you like. And as you go further down, because that's not all it, look at this. It is intense and busy. And these are farmers. These are just normal people. And of course, it's multi-phased. You're looking at several hundred years of history there. But generally speaking, this is what we're talking about. They are intensive and they are busy and they are working. And they also do some really weird stuff, which we will come to. And just now, in fact, I can say just now, this is the site I'm working on at the moment, which is 200 meters from this. So we know that it continues even further. So this is the geophysical response. And I just started digging the trenches in here today, and they are fabulous. They're absolutely wonderful. That's why I was home late from work, as Mike so wonderfully pointed out. He actually blamed me for being late, and I think it's there. I was late. But I kind of stayed out because we found some interesting things. And I've actually included a couple of those things today. And what all of these features are one of the unsung heroes of British archaeology, and the people that have dug hundreds of these would probably disagree, but it's the ditch. Now, ditches are very much so emblematic of Roman and Iron Age and Bronze Age and medieval and post-medieval population throughout of Britain. They don't really find them in Italy, for example, because you don't really need them. They don't find them in places like Sardinia or some of these Italian places. But the Romans, they built ditches and they love doing it. And it's the humble ditch. The humble ditch, that's how they showed their landscape. That's how they interacted with their world. And ditches could take on spiritual significances. They could take on symbolic significance in terms of boundaries. And a lot of the Roman boundaries that we find, they are long-lived. They live into the Roman period. They live, sorry, into the medieval period. Even some today. And Roman roads, of course, sometimes follow Iron Age boundary ditches. They follow these ditches that delineate entire social and economic landscapes from the Iron Age. And they were all, and including this, some of you will recognize this. This is a Roman road. They would do all of this with this humble tool right here, the shovel. I've used many shovels in my career, I must say, and we all have. And this is from the British Museum. It's one of my favourite exhibits in the entire British Museum, and the entire cabinet at all times. No one ever looks at it. No one's ever there. It's the quietest place I've ever seen in the Roman Britain Gallery in the British Museum. No one goes to look at it. It's the tools. It's the tools people were using that were found preserved. And it is a wooden shovel with iron bands on each side to maintain a cutting edge to dig these wonderful big features. And that's what they were doing. For the most part, that's exactly what they were doing. And it's a real shame that no one really looks at these exhibitions, because this is everything to them. This is their entire life. So if we look at an example of these farming communities in microcosm, so this is a wonderful site I did a couple of years ago at RAF Alconbury, just near Huntingdon. Some of you may recognise it. Actually, it was featured on I can't remember the programme's name. It was featured on Digging for Britain with Alice Roberts, and she came out to the site and everything else, and it was featured on that. But it's built basically underneath this entire Second World War and Cold War air base. And we came in because they're going to build some houses. And if you look, we found an entire Roman landscape was hidden underneath. An entire farming, rural agricultural landscape was hidden underneath. And in that was some really wonderful evidence for the people. And you can see their ditches here, this lovely enclosure here. And you can also see their roundhouse. There's a roundhouse just here. So there's ditches, you can see there's a lot of archaeology here. And as I said, it contained a lot of wonderful evidence for the people that lived there. And some of it's actually quite really revealing, such as this. This is one of my archaeologists, this is Steve, and he found a pit. Now, this is the plan of the site, and you can see it's very, very busy. But he's just here, and it's just outside a structure delineated by some post holes, which we think is a weaving shed, because just outside in this pit, was placed an entire set of loom weights, and they are for obviously making textiles. They're from a loom, and they're an entire set of loom weights, and they were rather wonderful things. So there were about 27 of them, and they date from the 1st century AD. We found pottery attached to just underneath them that dated from 40 to 80 AD, so the very beginning of the Roman imperial project in Britain. And you can see they've got little holes where they're suspended up to the loom. They're made of clay. You can see that even the wear marks of the rope has been used. So these things are very, very well used, and they put us into direct contact with the human beings that were using these. So these farmers were also making their own clothes from wool. They were weaving, which is part of a social aspect as well. There was incredibly social activity to do. And really interestingly, just up here, we found the burial of a woman, a single person, a single woman. And something really interesting about that, we carbon dated this woman. She was aged between 44 to 50. And we carbon dated her to between 29 AD to 123. Now, she was buried above an early, late Iron Age, early Roman ditch. So it can't be AD 29. We're looking at 43 onwards to 123. But 68% of that, within that, range was dated, believe it or not, between 43 to 100. So very, very close. And you've probably already seen the big reveal here. The osteoarchaeologist that did the report of this said that the teeth show extensive wear on the lingual surface, which is highly likely to be the result of craft work, such as spinning and weaving. And it's entirely possible, in fact, because I dug it, and because we're allowed some romantic conceit sometimes in our job, we can't always say could be. I am relatively convinced that this singular person probably used the loom weights with the loom nearby. So you get this direct link of this one person and the activity in which she was getting up to. So the lingual surface is on the outside. So she's got marks on her teeth. So I really like that, and I think that's a really wonderful thing. But what they also did, so she was also part of a community that just did some weird stuff. Now, we know this, and it's coming more and more common in British archaeology. They're called structured or placed or religious or deliberate deposits. There's hundreds of terms for this. So there's a very famous old saying that is kind of insulting to archaeologists, to be perfectly honest. But it's when an archaeologist doesn't know what something is, they call it ritual. Now, it's not really fair because generally speaking, when something is weird, it almost certainly is a form of ritualized behavior, or rather the culmination of a set of social mechanics, which results in the end product of burying stuff. And these people on this particular site were partaking in some proper weird stuff. So, for example, laid across the end of these pits, there was a system of pits that had been backfilled, and then they laid these weird bits of bone. Just very carefully, you can see they've arranged these. This is exactly how we found them, with a cattle skull, with a skull of a cow, and then some random bits of pottery in which they'd arranged. And you can see there to the top right where they'd put a series of stones underneath a cow. So underneath that was a cow skull, an entire cow skull that had been gently placed, and then they made this little type of kist burial just underneath in the bottom of the ditch. So these are becoming very, very recognised now in British archaeology, and they have been for many, many years. But it's becoming vastly prevalent that this is the ultimate symbol of how this population, how people in the rural landscape that are outside of the Roman norm of writing dedications or inscriptions, this is how normal people are communicating with the divine or their landscape. And we don't know whether or not, of course, the profoundness of how far this goes, but we do know that it is a definite recognized social and cultural mechanic that is probably imbued with hundreds, if not thousands, of complex social minutiae that go with it that we just can't see. So all we see is the end product. So it ranges from the prosaic, which are just bits of pottery that have been placed within certain interventions, or random groups of finds that are put together with select bits to show something or to demonstrate something. We don't really know what. And of course, the question is, how do you know that it's that and not just normal patterns of discard or rubbish? Context is key. Context is key to all of this. Generally speaking, when you find rubbish, you know it's rubbish. It's kind of all topsy-turvy, mixed together. These were all found exactly as you see them. They were found arranged. You have to arrange this kind of stuff. And of course, these two jawbones of a cow, there's no skull there, there's just the jawbones. And you can clearly tell that they've been arranged in some way. So have they been to close something, to open something? We don't really know. But then, of course, you have this, and then it's a bit more overt and a bit more clear. For example, this is the skull of a wolf that we found that had been buried very, very carefully in a pit. And it's probably the result of a hunt of some kind or something else. And this is a very exciting find because they're actually rarely found. But it is a wolf, or rather, it's as much of a wolf as it possibly can be until scientific results are done. But just to give you a glimpse into this world, when I got the email, when we were on site, and I got the email to say, oh, we're pretty sure this is a wolf. And the zoo archaeologist actually said, and it was a bloody big bastard as well. So we know that this thing, and it was gently placed. You can see that it's very well conditioned. It's very good. It's on the same site. So we know that they are placing these things, and it's a fervent thing. And then we get to the ones that people tend to assume are the more common ones, which are pottery deposits. So what you tend to see, and pits. Now, pits are just interventions. What is the biggest mystery in British archaeology? It's nothing to do with Stonehenge or anything else. It's what are pits for? We find pits from every period, and we have very little idea what they're actually for, unless, of course, they have overt things like this. So this is a collection of Nene Valley vessels. They date from the 4th century AD. And they were found in a pit, and they were arranged together. This one here, this large flagon, was actually sat on top of this mortaria, which was next to this beautiful painted piece of Nene Valley pottery. So these come from potteries just up the road, and they were placed very carefully within this pit. But it's only in post-excavation analysis where it really becomes clear exactly what's going on here. So first of all, it shows you there's a lot going on. The first thing I want to show you are the finger smudges on the decoration of this Nene Valley pottery. So in the earlier Roman period, in the 1st and 2nd century, this would never have got through quality control. It would never got through it. But into the 4th century, what you tend to see as the socioeconomic frameworks associated with large-scale industry start to buckle and break, and people start to move away from these specialized industries, what you tend to see is the quality of these vessels start to decline by quite a significant way. And this is what we are seeing here now. So it dates from 350 to around 400 AD, and it's right at the very end of the Roman period. You can see that it's ambitious but rubbish. So the way they've done it is decorated it. It's none of it's even, none of it's properly made right. There's finger smudges all over. They've kind of engaged with the idea of that'll do. And it's very worn. It's clearly been very well used. It's been very well looked after. And then they, the most intriguing thing that they've done is that they've chopped off the top. So originally this top would have been like this. But what they've done is they've decapitated it, which is exactly what the pottery specialist said. He said they've decapitated this vessel and it's one cut like this. Now, I wasn't going to include them because they're sensorially not very nice as well. And it's much of a minefield to go through all of this. But what it tends to follow are things called decapitation burials. So we can link something together, which is actually a very highly attested regional thing that happens in this region. Around the same period are human remains that are found that have had their heads cut off and placed between their feet. And it's attested elsewhere in Roman Britain as well, but not very well attested in temperate Europe. So it might be, of course, it's very difficult to say because we just don't know, but it does seem to be that this vessel was ritually killed before it was placed in the ground. Now, what's really poignant about this is that when we talk about structured deposits, now coin hoards kind of fall into that example. And what coin hoards tell you and what these tell you is that these are found on sites from two very different periods. So you get them from the very early Roman period and you get them from the very late Roman period. That's when you see two distinctive spikes from across Roman Britain. And it seems to be, or we could suggest reasonably, that they are perhaps some of them are a response to what's going on around them. And obviously, there is something quite big happening in the early Roman period. It's the arrival of the Roman state. Of course, it's the army. And these are people reacting to the world around them by doing things like this. And again, it's a poignant link to doing this. And then first news, this is today. We found one exactly the same today. We found a structured deposit at the bottom of a ditch. This is taken at 3 o'clock this afternoon. This is Carl, one of my archaeologists, doing this, and we found one at the bottom. It's 1st century pot, and he started to clean it up, and sure enough, it is placed on the bottom. Sadly, it's just fallen over, but it probably had food stuff in it. A lot of the time, the pot isn't always what's important, it's what's inside the pot, and it's always important to think about that. And then we found something next to it. So inside the pot was some remains of dog. There was some dog remains, some dog bones. And then this as well was found just next door, right next to the pot. So it's part of the same assemblage. And you can see that it is a somebody. So this is the marks pottery makes when they're spun on a wheel. And you find that they're indicative of wheel-thrown pottery from the Roman period, and later, of course, but from the Roman period. But this is not from the wheel. What somebody has done in a wet pot, they've actually scratched these wheel marks in this wonderful circular motif. So it's either that they are copying this or they're just doing it because it's the innate human need to express yourself artistically in whatever way. But this is a direct link to the past. And I was going to say that you are the third person to see this since the people that buried it. But of course, I didn't know that there was going to be over 200 people here. So you are the first 300 odd people to see this since the people that put it in the ground in the early Roman period. And of course, the jury's still out. We don't know, which actually leads me on to my next thing. So let's go into a little bit of silly. So pottery is the single biggest material remain we find from the past. And we base everything on that. We base all dating frameworks on pottery, and we supplement it with scientific data for the most part. Now, I can see, by the way, I can see that these comments are going up and up and up. And I hope they're questions or something, and hopefully I can deal with them. But there's a lot, and I suppose we will get to those. Anyway, so this is a site that Cambridge Archaeological Unit recently did out in the Fens somewhere, I think near Lincolnshire. And you can see this is a midden deposit. It's basically, this is pottery. Basically, this is the kind of stuff we find. This is how we base narrative on sites. And sometimes we know their names. For example, this is Sarius, and underneath is his apprentice, Setibogius. And Sarius was a really interesting guy. He was based in Rossington, and he basically followed the Roman army around, and he created mortaria for the Roman army. And his kiln was based in Rossington, and he would basically make commodities for the army. And he lived in Britain. And we don't know anything else about him other than that and what he specialized in. Now, I don't know if you remember the Prize Hall talk, some of you may, but we also found the same thing at Prize Hall with Genialis making pottery. But what's interesting about Rossington, and by this man himself, by Sarius, is that he does move about. He has been attested in kilns elsewhere as well, where he's stamped on the same thing. So these are itinerant people moving about. So we know their names sometimes, but a lot of the time we just can marvel at how wonderful they are artistically for the most part. Because look at this wonderful thing here. This was found by Oxford Archaeology in Tame in Oxfordshire. And this is a Roman vessel. It's a Roman beaker vessel. And you can see that it's beautifully decorated. These people are incredible artists for the most part, because they're not always perfect. And I think that's what makes real art. And then so you go from this, which are the designed bits where people have designed this and it's made to a design. And then you get this, which is, as you can see, where somebody has idly scratched a deer onto a piece of pottery. And it's actually a beautifully realized piece of art that somebody's just idly scratched on. So these people are completely depth. And of course, we get the very famous one. We get the Colchester vase, dating to around the end of the 2nd century. And this is a classic example of the beauty of Roman pot that you see in museums and the kind of things that we associate with it, showing gladiatorial combat. But the quality control is not always that good. For example, that's the epitome of it. But then you get things like this, which is slightly less good, let's be honest. This is from Northamptonshire, and this is slightly less good. And you can see that somebody's definitely loves gladiators, but they might not be the best at drawing them on their pots. Because I've never seen another one like this. So it could just be a one-off. And then sometimes with pottery, you just get weirdness, complete weirdness. This is a chicken vessel, as you probably can tell. Nobody knows why, but you can imagine. I don't know about anyone else in this virtual room that we're in, but that thing absolutely terrifies me, and I wouldn't want that anywhere near my house. But it shows just sometimes it's the complexity and brevity of the artistic expression of these people living here. And these are part of their daily lives, and they are interacting with this stuff all the time. And then sometimes you just get the downright weird. So this is, for example, another Colchester kind of vase type. It's an invalid vessel, and it comes from Colchester around the 2nd century. And of course, it shows chariot racing, and it's really good. It's really well realized. Everything's really good about it. And then you just get this, which nobody really understands why. So this was made at Great Chesterford, or rather found at Great Chesterford, and it's exactly the same thing as this, but it's a complete subversion. And you don't need me to tell you what's going on there, because answers on a postcard. Nobody really knows what's happening there. But is it a joke, for example? Is it a human being engaging in jokes? And speaking of jokes, there's another particular thing about the Roman British that is quite amazing, and it's the curse tablet phenomenon. Now, the curse tablets are a very specific type of votive object that is given to a god, and they're little tiny things, mostly of lead, but you get them of wood and all sorts of material, but mostly of lead, where they write little prayers to the god or goddess or whichever divinity, and they invoke them. They're basically prayers. They are answers on a postcard in parlance of things like Blue Peter and stuff like that. But the thing is, most of them that we know of from the Roman world are found in Britain, and British, they love them. So from around the empire, generally speaking, most of them are on the subject of things like unrequited love. I wish so and so would love me. Let her be hit over the head until she loves me, or until he loves me, or something. Or for the support of sports teams, or for all sorts of other reasons. In Britain, about most of them are theft. The British really don't like people nicking their stuff. And for example, this one, honoratus to the holy god Mercury. So this is from Uli, the Temple of Uli. And honoratus to the holy god Mercury, I complain to your divinity that I've lost 2 wheels and 4 cows and many small belongings from my house. So he's written that. And it also shows you their names, first and foremost, but it gives you that kind of impression. And then you get this person who had Vilbia stolen from them. But also, what I want you to notice is how utterly awful these invocations actually are for another human being to be paid off. So, may who carried off Vilbia from me become liquid as the water. What an awful thing to say. May she who so obscenely devoured her become dumb. By the way, just very quickly, there's a huge debate at the moment about what is Vilbia. The standard the standard interpretation is that Vilbia is a person. She's a woman, and she's been stolen by somebody else. So it could be all manner of things. But there's also somebody that comes out with the idea that actually Vilbia is a bastardization of a word for an iron tool of some kind. But I don't know. I think if someone nicked an iron tool, I don't think they're going to respond in this kind of way. So may she who so obscenely devoured her become dumb, so long as someone, whether slave or free, keeps silent and knows anything about it. It goes on and on and on with these formulaic things. But it shows you that there is a social complexity to all of this world that is going on, and they're involving the divine with this. And I think it mostly shows with this man. His name is Docilianus, and Docilianus is the angriest man in probably the universe at this time. And what he's written, of course, as you can see, son of Bracarus. And what he's done is, the reason why I included this more than anything else is it's been composed on this little tiny lead tablet like an inscription. So it's been the way it's been set out. I realize I'm pointing at my screen. It's the way it's been set out is actually set out like an inscription. So it's kind of using Roman formula of many different types of artistic expression to explain themselves. And Docilianus is not really a Romanized name, or rather a Roman name per se. It could be some form of native synergized name. But I really like Docilianus because he gets really mad and he says, I curse him who has stolen my hooded cloak, or carakilam. You can see it just there. Carakilam is a very distinctive type of cloak, the caracalla. Mostly were made in Britain. Very famous, actually, Britain was for making the caracalla. Whether man or woman, whether slave or free, that's something you tend to see in a lot of curse tablets. It's very formulaic. That Sulis, not this bit though, that Sulis inflict death upon and not allow him sleep or children now or in the future until he's brought my cloak back to that divinity. Guy's mad. Someone's just nicked a cloak from him, and my God, is he upset about it? And so would you be. And this is what I like about this. It is a moment of pure emotion from a human being in the past, from a person that lived in Roman Britain. And of course, today in the modern world, we are so much better than that. We don't think of anything like that. Though we are so much better than that in the modern world. We don't think of anything like that. We're so much better. Obviously, of course, we are. I mean, what am I talking about? Of course, we're a modern society. We're above all that. So now we're getting into the really meat of it. You'll all be pleased to know, because I'm sure some of you have fallen asleep. Some of you wish we'd just stop now and everything else. But I just want to mosaics. Okay, now mosaics are fabulous things, and we've all seen them. We've all been to marvel at them and everything else. But just to contextualize mosaics a little bit, especially in Britain. It's a really wonderful thing. So most of the mosaics that you see today in Roman Britain were laid in the first half of the 4th century. There was this huge boom in building in the early 4th century, and there's lots of different interpretations of what's going on. Is it as a response to the socio-economic crisis in Roman Europe at the time, where you're getting a lot of people coming from Europe that have got a lot of money, a lot of people of a certain aristocratic class, and they're coming to Britain because it's safer, because it's actually an island, so it's a lot safer. Most raw materials used were the local types, but you do get variations of that. It was incredibly time consuming. Just one tessellated pavement at Colchester was the product of at least 700 work hours, which is an astonishing number. And perhaps one of my favorite parts of this is that they are incredibly regionally distinctive. It's been thought, perhaps even linked to pre-Roman tribal communities. So they are also symbolic. They're using Roman medium to, I don't know, to display pre-Roman tribal identities. So, for example, common language of Roman art to maintain distinct regional identities. So, for example, the Dibuni and the Durotriges southwest of Britain. And the thing is, how is it all organized, which is the thing I'm really interested in about the human beings that do this. How is it organized? And it probably, officine means workshop, and it probably means from which mosaics could be ordered. So you could probably go to a local market, or someone that knows someone else, and you could go and probably pick them out of a book and say, I would like this, but I would like this kind of idea, or a lot of them would bespoke. And then the people doing this would come from abroad. They could be locals trained up to do it. They would be working for a single patron, or people like Capability Brown, for example, that would work for several different people over several years, and then itinerant craftspeople as well from all over the empire coming over. And the thing is about mosaics are quite astonishing. So this is actually one that I worked on in Somerset. It's actually a new place now. It's called Villa Ventorum, and it's actually a health spa. It has been rebuilt, and it's called the Newt. So do Google that, because it's quite wonderful. It's been rebuilt. It's part of a health spa. But this is during the initial excavations where we found this wonderful mosaic we called the Diana mosaic. And it's classic 4th century. It's really colourful. It's got the guilloche pattern on it. It's very much indicative of the 4th century persuasion. And sometimes what you get with this kind of thing with these mosaics are the maker's marks. You get their signatures in them. For example, you get them at Bigner in the middle. You get these ones from the pavement itself, like Egnatius, so we know the name of one of them that lay these things. And they use artistic expression for their signatures as well, which again is this wonderful poignant direct link that we often overlook when we're looking at mosaics. We tend not to believe that, we do marvel at wow, people made these. But sometimes if we look a little bit closer, and they hide them in their mosaics as well, such as Helicon at Aldeburgh. And this is the Villa Ventorum mosaic from above. And I just want to show you something and demonstrate something that when you find it and everything else, we have to remember when we marvel at mosaics in Roman villas, we tend to forget that most of the time you couldn't really see them. So this is inside now. This is the reconstructed version. And most of the time, mosaics are covered in furniture, and you wouldn't really see them, and they would take them for granted. So we see them now and we marvel at them. And a lot of the time when they were first made, they were like, oh, look at this is wonderful. But they show an awful lot about social mechanics. And it's actually probably the plasterwork around the room that was much more of a topic of conversation if they were going to say it, and it links in thematically and everything else. But it's important to remember that most of the time they wouldn't really see these mosaics. That's not always the case. I mean, you get Venus, for example. This is Venus at Bigner, and a very, very famous Venus, really well executed, because not all mosaicists are very good, okay? You get some of them from Britain that are, well, awful, to be perfectly honest. But this is Venus, and it's actually quite a common theme for mosaics. And this is at Bigner, and she's rather wonderful. You can see the floral garland in her hair. You can see the way that the mosaicist has tried to work in shade and shadow and everything on her face. It's really well done, but it is nothing compared to this, for example, in North Africa, which is Venus coming out of the ocean, of course, with the mermen and everything else associated with her. Which is quite wonderful. The thing is, right, it depends on who you get to lay your mosaic. For example, at Rudston in Yorkshire, I'm pretty sure they hired Del Boy to put theirs in, because it wasn't quite the same, shall we say, as North Africa. In fact, if anything, it's amazing. It's one of my favorite. In fact, it's my entirely favorite thing from all of Roman Britain. This, for me, symbolizes the human spirit in archaeology more than anything, because you can come up with a multitude of things as to what's happened here. Has it been done down the pub? Have they said, listen, can you do a Venus mosaic? Of course I can. Yeah, absolutely. Of course I can. Can you actually do a mosaic? Yeah, I'm really good at it. I'm really, really good. Okay, then. Well, you can come and put my mosaic in then. Really good price, I promise. It's brilliant. But there's so much wrong here. The shape of the body. Now, remember when I showed you Atola earlier on? There's a very distinctive correlation here, which certainly suggests a Romano-British craftsperson has had their best go at this. But they've even tried, for example, the shade on her face, the sunlight on her face. But what they've done is there's no nuance. They've just piled loads of white tesseract into where her face should be. And there she is with her claw-like fingers. And you see with these wonderful little like hoof-like feet. And it's a really wonderful thing. But if you look at it in its setting, so this is in a museum in Hull. I do say absolutely go and see this. It is fabulous to look at. But what this is, it's actually reminiscent extremely of the themes that they find in North Africa, which might suggest, of course, that the patron that paid for this either served on the governing staff, of course, or were part of the aristocracy of the North African province. And then they came to Britain. They were stationed in Britain. They didn't have anybody else that could do this for them. So they hired a local craftsperson that kind of made a bit of an issue of it. And the reason why they are very correlated with North African is the scenes of hunting, not the scenes of hunting necessarily, it's scenes from the arena, or rather harina, which is Latin for sand. It's why the word arena comes from. But you can see that they are all emblematic of scenes of the arena, which was a really popular artistic style in North Africa during this period. So you could, for example, see the female hunter, and they've made that pretty overt that that is a female, of course. The catharsis vessels, which again are very, very synonymous with that kind of thing. And then you get the stag, which is probably the British bit. And of course, you get this Leo Flammer, the fiery lion. But of course, Leo Flammer has, of course, got a spear driven through them. And then you get Taurus Amikida, the bull called Man Killer. Wow. These are animals that would have probably appeared in an arena somewhere, and this is what we get. But what we're getting is, for example, just to put it into perspective, they're getting a microcosm of a North African art style in the north of Britain, made by a Romano-British sculptor or Romano-British mosaicist, probably called Del Boy. And that's not the only one. Okay, that's not the only one. This is Romulus and Remus, of course. It is the ultimate symbol of all of Roman Britain. The thing is, the British had a go at this, and this is from Aldborough, and goodness me, they really got this wrong, because it's like, can you draw a wolf? Of course I can draw a wolf, absolutely, I can do a wolf, it's easy. And they started off by making a horse, and then they decided, hang on, no, that doesn't look like no, wait on, this isn't right. God, we've got to add the twins as well. Because look at Romulus and Remus down here. What are they, borrowers? And then you get the wolf actually, like subversively, is looking at the person looking at it with that grin on their face. The thing is, this one is massive. This one is actually disputed. The authenticity of this one is disputed. But the accepted interpretation is this is absolutely contemporary Roman. And there is an interesting side of this, of course, that is beyond what you can already see, because that thing will haunt your dreams for the rest of your life. But what's interesting about this is there's a theory to suggest that maybe, what if that is on purpose? It is a part of, I don't know, cultural rebellion, for example. What if it was done by a slave and they did this on purpose? Or what if that is actually what they wanted? They wanted this grotesque inversion of the Roman symbology, if you like, the Roman iconographical manifestation of their power. Perhaps it's something like that. Who knows? They're human beings. Nobody would really tell. So you'll all be like very pleased to know that we've actually come to the end of the talk this evening. I want to end on that, and I hope that I know it's been a bit of a random up and down bits and pieces from across Roman Britain, but all this really needs to be, because it's impossible to show a lot of this stuff, like to really demonstrate a lot. And there's so much that I've missed out. It was one of the hardest talks I've ever written, because there's so much I wanted to include. But these are just some of the things that I think really signify Roman Britain for me. So it's a very personal thing, and it probably won't be for a lot of people, but they're very personal things for me. And because that is what makes Britain Roman. It is that it is the combination of all of these cultures, all of these things, all combining into one under the umbrella of an island in the middle of nowhere to the Romans. So thank you all so much for listening, and I apologize for the randomness of it, but I hope we all go away from this with a slightly different perspective on some of these people, and more importantly, some of these personalities from Roman Britain, because ultimately, are they the thoroughly modern ancient Romans, or are we just the thoroughly ancient modern British? So thank you ever so much for listening, and thank you.
Right, well, thank you, Paddy. That was brilliant. And I don't know if you're getting it on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. This is something new to Zoom. Lots of applause.
Really?
Yes,
no, I can't
really.
see that. Oh my goodness! Thank you all so much. That's so kind of you. That's Oh,
it's still coming. It's still coming. Honestly, it was absolutely fantastic.
Oh, thank you so
And
much.
I didn't blame you for being late. It was just a statement.
No, I panicked, Mike. I didn't know what else to say. I just panicked. I threw you under the bus. I'm really sorry.
See, it wouldn't be the first time. Okay, right. I haven't had any questions through yet, but I'm guessing there's going to be a few.
Okay.
In fact, I had one myself and I wrote it down. I can't find the flipping piece of paper now. Oh, well. I'll save you from that one. If you've got anything for me, Rob, can you send them through? I'm sure there will be. Yeah, I was very interested in the loom weights.
Yes. Yeah.
There are so. Sorry about this while we're waiting for questions, but there are so many things you see described as loom weights that cannot possibly be loom weights because they're too small.
Yes.
Anybody who's ever woven, as I have, knows you've got to have a huge amount of tension for a loom to work, and that needs a lot of weights. So great.
And they are, yeah,
well
exactly.
identified.
Yeah.
It was great to see them. Here we go. Okay, Rob, I've got an email through. It says Q3. I hope that doesn't mean that Q1 and Q2 have disappeared somewhere, because I'm not seeing them in spam. Oh, yeah, there they are. Sorry, they've just arrived in spam. Apologies. Right. Oh, goodness, we've got a lot. Some are just comments rather than questions, so we can get through those fairly quickly. Okay. Somebody complimenting you on the description of Cicero.
Sorry about that.
Not heard that before.
That's
couple of observations. Children's toys found at the Carlisle bathhouse.
Again, some of these things I can't include, but absolutely,
yeah. Well, Frank, I'm sure will be talking about that. Yeah, Frank will be talking about that in the next talk, in a few weeks' time. Molten, from David Breer. Molten, a child was buried with a toy bear. It was made of jet, a magical substance for luck. I wasn't aware of that, David. Thanks for letting us know.
Mm-hmm.
Several on cats and dogs.
Huh.
John Barry says he's right. I have no idea what that was about.
Cicero was a dickhead. That's probably one. I think with the can I just jump in, Mike, very quickly? I just want to get this one done. The domesticated cats in Egypt, yes, in Roman occupied Egypt, but Egypt retained very much so its flavor. What I meant really was there is not a single name of a domestic cat that comes from us from the Roman world at all that I know of, that Josephine Quinn has recently said. So that's the thing. I don't know. There probably was domesticated cats. Of course there were. They're wonderful animals. So yeah, that's probably an answer to that.
Okay. Susan Biddle points out that a Romano British pet dog was recently found in Oxfordshire. Wittenham Clumps. Are you familiar? I've not come across that one. David Breer again. Doves ? I'm not sure what you mean by that, David. Whether he's suggesting doves were
something
already
I've
here.
shown. Yeah,
I don't know. We keep going. Yes, an observation, this one from the Digging Gardener, who's one of our regulars.
Mm-hmm.
Archaeology in Dorset seems to be showing that the Durodriches, I always struggle with that, continue with their little farms and banjo enclosures long after the establishment of the local Roman town. They simply seem to be not bothered with living in a Roman manner. Yes, they take the pottery and wine, but stick with their nice roundhouses. That's pretty common everywhere.
I think so, and it's not that's living in a Roman manner.
Yeah,
that's using Roman technology. It's very common. Exactly, you're absolutely right. It's the same everywhere, but it's nice to see this rural, this distinctive.
I think there's a difference possibly in the size, the relative size of the two. How many people are living in towns and how many are just going on as before, and it certainly changes with time as well, doesn't it? As you get certainly into the third century, there's a lot of change.
Exactly, because you get construction projects. It's very similar to the urban environment you get in the Mediterranean, where you get large-scale construction projects. It calls people in, and of course they've got the slavery and everything else. So absolutely, the ultimate thing that I want everyone to take away from this is that Britain and the Roman Empire was about continuation, and the regional variety and regional diversity that we see in the pre-Roman Iron Age, Bronze Age, and Neolithic periods, it is exactly the same. If anything, it's more intensified during the Roman period.
A comment again on the question from Toby Mottram. I didn't know this. Apparently, apples originate from the foothills of the Taishan Mountains on the border between Xinjiang and Kazakhstan. So there must have been a lot of long-distance trade. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Here we go. I've just seen one as well. Question. Ali said that Roman ditches were much more common in Britain. I thought ditches were a feature of Roman roads throughout the empire. Right, ditches, yes, absolutely. But ditches as a primary form of landscape cultivation or a primary form of landscape use is a very distinctively British thing. Of course, ditches are just holes in the ground. So, of course, they're used all over the place. But in Britain, they are the primary form of landscape identifier, basically, because it's wet most of the time.
Really? Not this summer.
No, this summer's been grim. Yeah, this summer's been really hard.
Yeah, rather you than me digging in that. Although it'll go from one extreme to another one. You'll be up to your knees in crap in another few days. Right, Penny's asking if you know much about Iron Age roads in Britain. How many Roman roads have been upgraded? Iron Age roads, or even not upgraded at all? And could some more disputed Roman roads be a British Iron Age construction? Penny, that would take all night to answer.
That is the ultimate existential question of that entire thing. Yeah, I don't think anyone's got the time for that. Loads is the question. I think is the answer.
Penny will have to have a discussion at some other time about that. But it is very, very complicated. Iron Age roads, inverted commas roads, were very, very different to Roman roads. But anyway, let's move on. Lots of observations. Sorry, I'm having to go through them. There's an awful lot here, but mainly comments from the chat rather than questions. So, yeah, I thought this. Bill Free comments that the chicken pot looks like a Nick Park creation. It really does.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh yeah, lovely. Thanks, Penny. You are so right. If you think nobody would write a curse like that about an iron tool, then you have never seen an archaeologist lose their favourite trowel.
Oh, I have. I have, yeah. Most of the time, I'm the one stealing it. For the most part.
Oh dear. Right. Okay, that's that lot.
Sorry, I'm going to answer some, Mike, and then you tell me the ones. So, Toby, they knew it would be covered by the furniture. Thank you, Toby. I'm well aware of that. But what's important is I'm talking about the modern visualization of mosaics. I know that contemporarily they knew, of course, that would be the case. But we tend to look at them and go, "Wow, they're fabulous. They would have been appreciated in their own time like that." But a lot of the time, that's what I was talking about. Is that we tend to, in the modern period, we tend to forget that there is a furniture, there is many objects that we don't see that would have been part of that identifying culture of those rooms. That's what I meant by that. So I
There is a modern period parallel really to that, though, isn't there? In the Victorian carpets, some Victorian
yes,
carpets were
very good point.
really elaborate, and they were entirely covered in furniture. You couldn't have
Mhm.
seen most of them at all.
But they did it because they could, and I think it's that innate need, isn't it, to make something
Yeah,
beautiful simply because of the sake of doing it.
yeah. Lots of observations, very few questions. You might get away with this.
I don't know. Observations are worse.
Well, lots of thanks. Um, okay, somebody whose nameless here, brilliant, but bet you're even funnier with a beer.
Oh yeah, you've got no idea. Yeah, I'm absolutely. I'm a barrel of laughs. I'm so funny with a beer. That's really kind of you. Well, buy me one then. I don't know why we're sat here still.
Sadly,
Um,
they don't. I haven't got a name, so you can't.
I would talk ad nauseum, and that's what would happen.
Yeah, lots of observations. This one, yeah, again from Penny, who commented that she'd done pottery painting as a child to a similar standard as the gladiator, but a serious question, wondering if sometimes they did let children have a go.
Absolutely, no, definitely. Yeah, that's the thing. It's something I wanted to discuss. In fact, that's a very flippant comment, but that's a very valid point. It's something I wanted to include, but of course I was limited by time, and even in my time frame, I'm limited by time. Um, Absolutely. So I did a talk recently about Prize Hall, an excavation at Prize Hall, where we find evidence for children. Children are absolutely subsumed into industrial worlds, into the artistic worlds, because everyone's got to learn somewhere as apprentices and things like that. But it doesn't stop it being not very good. I mean, I have a 4-year-old son that draws me pictures all the time. I'm not keeping all of that. You know, it's very similar to this, and I think sometimes what we find are rubbish. I think children are absolutely, and it's the same with women. All of people, all the farmers, everybody else, they're all the same and they're all involved. But it's just showing that children exist, which is very, very easy to forget.
Now, there was a question which, oh, hang on. Yeah, there was a question which I don't seem to have from Rob, but anyway, I've seen it in the chat from Toby Mottram, who was wondering if the maker, whose name escapes me, from Rossington, moved around or whether he stayed put. Whether was the material that turned up on the Antonine Wall shipped from near Doncaster? Most people
Yes.
won't know where Rossington was.
Yeah. Sorry, I should. Yeah.
I suspect, actually, to comment on this, because you might not be aware, but right next to that particular potter's workshop, there was a mid-first century fortress.
Ah, right. Okay, that's good to
We
know. Yeah.
don't know how long it was occupied, but usually they were relatively short-lived. Usually called a vexillation fortress, and will have been built just before Rome moved north in the 70s. How long it stayed, we don't know, but it's quite possible that he moved on not too long after that. The whole area around the eastern side of Doncaster is absolutely full of kilns. There was pottery production all over the place. So I think most likely we don't know, but you might probably have your own thoughts on that, Penny.
I would. Well, I think it's so complex. The movement of objects, especially, is really complex. But it's not. I mean, just things move about and stuff. So yeah, probably not best to go massively into it because I think you've made every point as valid as I think
He
you
may
can.
just have been following the Roman army, is my point. But
I think this is the
I
thing.
understand
Most
that.
of the time, you know, when we see like it's the same as saying every time we find an Apple phone, that means there's an Apple distributor somewhere. It doesn't. It means that that object has travelled and been dropped by somebody. Objects travel through many hands. It could come from what it doesn't necessarily mean the potter is there,
No.
but it does mean that those pots have achieved there. You know, they've got there somehow. It means, you know, that's ultimately it's what came first, the chicken or the egg. The chicken, the horrendous chicken pot, which I'm glad people have said because it is the thing to haunt your dreams. And I've seen it in person, and it's awful. It's an awful thing.
Yeah, but it really. I wonder if a certain character in Wallace and Gromit the name of which has gone completely out of my head, but I did wonder if some of them were inspired by that pot because the similarity is stunning.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Right. We are getting very late, and yeah, people are dropping out now. But you did really well holding everybody. We peaked at 215, I think.
Right. Wow.
I
Okay.
did want to apologise. Nearly everybody's gone, but I wanted to apologise for the trouble I know a lot of people had getting in, and I'm not really understanding why, apart from the usual Eventbrite login page not working properly, telling people that we hadn't started the meeting yet. When of course we had. So I don't know what that was about, but it looks like most people did get in from the numbers we had, so that's good.
God, there's so many questions here. Thomas Lemonby, how did the breakdown of late? Oh, here we go. How did the breakdown of late Roman Britain affect the material life of Roman Britons? Did the life of ordinary people become noticeably less rich in regards to food and the ability to buy treats such as jewelry, etc.? Actually, it's exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite of that. What we see is an intensification of commodification of stuff, because what you tend to see is there's more stuff. That's why you find more Roman coins and more everything else. It's right at the end of the Roman period that we start to see a dramatic breakdown of this kind of thing happening. But for the most part, it didn't really affect them at all. If anything, they intensified. They were suddenly able to afford or suddenly able to procure. The normal people that lived in the countryside were able to procure far more wide-ranging objects that they wouldn't have been allowed. They wouldn't have been financially able to afford before. So, on a very brief, simplified version, generally speaking, yeah, they had a lot more stuff. But it's only in the very end, so between 350 to 400, where you start to see a dramatic fall off. And then Andrew thought the only evidence of rabbit was from Fishbourne. That's actually not true. We've done several excavations where we do find rabbit, and Robin Fleming wrote a wonderful book called The Material Fall of Roman Britain, which is where I got a lot of that data from. And she's quoted several other articles that mentions the introduction of the rabbit into Britain. It's kind of, I know that it's kind of a difficult thing, but it's generally accepted that the Romans brought rabbits to Britain. God, there's so much here, isn't there?
There are a lot now, yes.
Wow.
Yes, the phallic pot, that was hilarious.
Cool thing, isn't it?
Yeah, probably a great talking piece in a military veterans settlement, but would have produced huge good luck when watching the races at the circus at Colchester.
You know how it's been interpreted that I didn't actually want to touch on because I just thought I didn't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, ironically down the rabbit hole. But it's the chariot driver has been interpreted as being a woman. So you've got this subversion of gender politics as well. The chariot driver is a woman whipping a chariot pulled by lots of phalluses. It could be a joke on many levels. That's why I included it, because it's ripe for interpretation.
Really good question from Philip Bevan. Was the crazy occupation density at Wintringham similar north of the Trent / Yorkshire, Lancashire, Cumbria, where the topography is completely different?
No, it's all about in terms of occupation. No, there's less people up there, first and foremost. Secondly, it's on the Claylands. It's right in the middle of Britain. It is one of the agricultural heartlands. It's one of the places where they are growing much more of the stuff. And at Wintringham and around that area, on the Claylands, which is what I call them, the Claylands around here, pastoral agriculture is, I didn't go into that, and I should have done really, but pastoral agriculture is by far and away the biggest thing. It's cattle and sheep, and it's probably the same up north, but I suspect fully that there is correlation, but not direct comparison.
No, I think it is to do with the topography. And sorry, Philip, but not all of Yorkshire is hills and mountains. The area we've already been talking about around Rossington, Doncaster, and then moving up through the Vale of York and the Vale of Mowbray, the thinking now is that the population density was actually very high. Work that Colin Hazelgrove did around Stanwick, in the area around there, he was comparing the density to be similar to exactly the area that you're talking about. And that's work he did, what, 10 years ago?
Mm.
Now it must be. David Breer will know. David knows everything. So if it wasn't 10 years ago, David, tell me. From John Lucas, I love your analogy from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Yes, so did I. I've always thought that at the basic level, farmers always had to donate a percentage of their produce as a form of taxation. In the Iron Age, to whomever, when the Romans arrived, the tax levying authority may have changed, but the percentage may not have. Then when the legions departed in roughly 410, the locals would have carried on paying their taxes, but now to the commander of the local militia, rather than the Roman central authority. So I suppose what he's saying is that nothing really changes. What are your thoughts on this?
That's exactly right. That's exactly how we call it the rise of the kingdom. It's what happens. So villa estate owners is a classic example of this. So what you get is when the Roman army goes, the administration has gone, but the Roman army doesn't go, just the main military force. Most of the people are still here. And what you get are owners of estates with large groups of people. So if you've got a villa, for example, and you've got 50 strong, able-bodied people with you, and you look over and see another one that has only got 20, you're going to go and have it. You're going to go and take it. And that's how kingdoms are formed. You're exactly right. History repeats itself. First, it's a tragedy. Second, it's just a joke. Karl Marx said that. And it's exactly that. And it is just the same repetition of events that go on. Before the Romans arrived, factionalist politics was rife in Britain at the time, in late Iron Age Britain. In fact, it's one of the reasons why the Romans invaded was to get involved in factional politics between a man called Verica and his brother of the Atrebates, and they got involved with that. And it's all part of that. And the Romans just arrived and have a veneer of control. They leave and everyone disappears again. And it just all goes the same. People are people, which is the point of the talk.
And always will be.
Yes.
Digging Garner again, wondering what the earliest evidence of apple cultivation in the Levant is.
Jesus.
Not a clue.
No, I've no idea. I've no idea. What a wonderful question. No, but that's very much a question for somebody else.
No idea who. Sorry, we can't help you on that. I'm flicking down to see. Yes, from John Lucas, the chicken pot will haunt my dreams forever. Lots of thanks, though. Lots of thanks.
Well, that's right. I've got to say thank you all for having me, and thank you for Mike and everybody else, and also everybody like Dave and everybody that invites me to come and do this, to come and talk to you all for an hour and a half and just waste your Thursday evening. I really appreciate it. No,
we appreciate you doing it. Yeah, your enthusiasm just wins us all over, Paddy. You do a fantastic job.
Can I ask something by voice?
Was that a question, Bev?
Well, can I?
Yes, you can. Of course you can. Bev always struggles a bit with the chat, so...
No problem. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So you were saying that the ditches are a very Romano-British phenomenon. Were you not?
British. So what I'm saying is the landscape determinism, in so much as British are a very, very in Roman Britain, it is the most common form of archaeological feature in Britain, for sure, is the ditch.
So my question is, when you dig a ditch, there's obviously going to be upcast, and one of the unique features about the Roman countryside is the number of earthen banked enclosures, fortified, small, even very small places, apparently fortified. I don't think that they were, but this is a unique feature of the second century. Second century. Is there any connection between the ditches and these earthen, earth-banked, so say, fortifications of small towns, big towns, all kinds?
It's literally the most prosaic answer is the obvious one. It's the upcast from the ditch. They don't carry it away. They place it next to the ditch, and it creates a bank. So it's a serendipitous, if you like, it's a serendipitous product of the production of the ditch. They throw it next to them, and it banks up. So fortified is, I completely agree with you, and it's refreshing to hear that. Fortified is not a thing. When you find fortifications, especially Roman fortifications, they are enormous and you can't miss them. Most of the time, the Iron Age and Roman, most of the time, ditches and banks that come with them on the sides, they are most of the time, they're to keep animals in. They're to keep animals in and they're to drain it. And human beings, they don't move the bank very far. And it also, they serve multiple purposes. These upcasts from ditches, they act as windbreaks, for example. And they also, they increase biodiversity, because as soon as you upcast them, you get this rich earth that then starts to grow grass and trees and flowers, which attracts bees and it attracts birds.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it is part of the way that their socio-economic agricultural world works.
But my question is, in as much as settlements being surrounded by earthen banks, and then later on, many of them by walls, though not all, this is unique to Britain.
No.
Yes,
I'd say no. You mean like digging? Like, you mean enclosing settlements? No, this is absolutely no. This is it's a feature of many parts of Roman temperate Europe, especially, but temperate Europe for sure, because it's just the easiest form of landscape manipulation is digging up big hole, and that's simply the most. But the thing is, that is not distinctive to Britain. That is a very specific type of thing to do. It's a very specific function. With the ditch thing, it's absolutely not the. I would certainly say no. It's not completely unique to Britain, but some forms of it are, I would say, more British than others, if you like. Nothing is peculiar to any one place in archaeology.
Okay.
I feel like that wasn't.
No, that's right.
Do you want me to? What do you clarify? Because I kind of I don't. If I'm honest, I don't really know what you meant by digging ditches around settlements. That is an incredibly broad thing to say. Are we talking about, for example, if we're going to go really far into this rabbit hole, are we talking about nucleated settlements? Are we talking about enclosed settlements, unenclosed settlements? Are we talking about farmsteads, villas? Because the amount of sheer variety in settlement types is that's what I didn't really know what you meant.
Well, sorry, settlement is such a vague word, isn't it? No, I meant things, nucleated settlements, certainly. Small towns and even big towns.
Towns. Okay, urban sites.
They all start off with earthen surrounds. Surrounds, and then many of them go on, but not all, go on to have walls.
Yes.
I just wondered whether there was something very Romano-British or British or something about
much better. Okay. Yes, I can see what you mean. Now that's quite interesting, because the walling of these is a direct response to the socio-political situation going on outside. So in the beginning, when the Romans first arrive, and they start to establish these urban developments, these towns or larger settlements, if you like. If they start to establish these, they make these earthen banks, and they're not fortified. They're just a way of delineating space.
Yes.
But then, and because they're perfectly safe, they've got the Roman military that would look after them. They've got all of this kind of stuff going on.
Yes.
But then in the 3rd century, after around 260, but it kind of grew much in fever pitch after, say, I don't know, the breakaway emperor of Carausius, for example, in around 286, it starts to change. And what happens is they start to build walls around their settlements. And that's because of inter-provincial factionalism that occurs. It's not always just to do with incoming people. So you are right. It is peculiarly Romano-British because they are localized responses to each other. They're more like they're fortifying towns against rival towns, against miscreants and bandits and things within the countryside. Because as the Roman military starts to buckle and shrink, then so does the direct imperial control that they're able to directly put on the population. So it's a rising criminality, definitely. So you are right, absolutely. That's a really good point.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bev.
Yes.
Just one eye on the time. Couple of things. Yes. John Lucas, who was apparently looking into the Claudian invasion of 43, and thanks you for your insight. And this is the important thing, he's offered to buy you a beer.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
So that's John Lucas. So you're going to have to take him up on that sometime. I don't know if you know a John Lucas, but if you do, he's going to buy you one. Philip Bevan, a question.
Yeah.
And this will probably be the last one. Fortunata, the slave girl, came from Diablintia. Any idea where that was?
Jublin in France. It's modern Jublin in France. It's in France.
Ah,
yeah.
There you are. If you're still with us, Philip, that's your answer.
John Lucas. Thanks. I'm looking into the Claudian invasion of 43 CE. I don't know if you can see this. This is a Roman coin of Claudius from the invasion, found on a site actually today. So we just found this just today, and it would have been probably used as currency from the invading forces. So I just thought you'd like to see that. Just randomly picked it out of my pocket, which is probably not where it should have been.
No, I was wondering where the fines bag was, but anyway.
The fines bag is my pocket. It's very safe. It's very safe.
I'm so glad it's not just me. Comments on the size of some of the embankments around Oppida.
Oppida don't exist in Britain. There's no evidence for Oppida in Britain whatsoever.
It's terminology, isn't it?
It's a very big question. I mean, hill forts.
Well, places like Silchester. So
now then, yeah, okay, right, okay. So yeah, I see.
And in my part of the world, Stanek, although the population centre is tiny.
I think you're right. I think it's about terminology. Oppida is a very specific terminology rendered by Julius Caesar during the invasion of Gaul, where he talks about the centralised settlements of Gaul were organised around Oppida. There's no evidence for that in Britain. I think Britain it's something similar, but I know what you mean. It's just we've got to be clear on terminology with Oppida. My dog is barking at me for some reason, probably because of Oppida.
Yeah, it's one of those words that's been appropriated, really, I think.
I think so too. I think it's an easy word, like Romanization, isn't it? It's as you know what they mean, and ultimately that's all that really matters. You know what it means. Yeah. But Oppida, I think I like the word. I do.
Okay. The Digging Gardener is now asking what your preferred terminology is.
Oh my goodness. Proto-urban development.
Yeah. That's about right.
Or proto-Oppida.
Yeah.
I'll go there because that's just I prefer that. I think there's just so much more complexity involved. You know, the life of an archaeologist, and you'll all know this, the life of any archaeologist and a historian is simply saying it's more complicated than that, and then you die. You just constantly say that over and over and over again. It's more complicated. I think it's more complicated than that. And then you just die and that's your career over. That's just the end of it. So it's just that ad nauseum, isn't it?
No, I think I've said that twice tonight already. So.
Yeah, you did. It's not, it's just that. Because the thing is, as long as people know what we mean, there's no problem with these terminologies. There's nothing wrong.
And I think that's that.
Right. Oh, right. So sorry, the Digging Garden. I will just very quickly. There's definitely pre-Roman settlements here, Oppidum, with vast embankments surrounding them. Silchester. That's true, right? Okay, but there are enormous levels of Iron Age settlement. What an Oppida is a proto-urban settlement, which means an urban settlement can only be defined where it's got sectors within it that are defined parameters for certain functions. So, for example, you get an industrial bit, a settlement area, a domestic area. That is what an oppidum is, and there is no evidence of that in pre-Roman Iron Age Britain. They are much more. It seems like everybody's engaged in. It's so much more complex than that. And Silchester, yes, but Silchester is a planned town. Most of that comes from the idea of Roman hostages going to Rome and then coming back and trying to develop this idea of a planned settlement. It's one of those big questions, and there are really important hill forts are a different thing from 350 BC onwards. They're a completely different thing. We tend not to think about those too much. In general terms of pre-Roman Iron Age, there are massive settlements. There really are, but we can't find them. There is one really interesting one that is the closest thing to an oppidum I can think of, and that's in Essex. And it was excavated by a colleague of mine, and it's in Essex, and that one's Very, very interesting. That's a large defined enclosure with roundhouses in it, and each one of those seem to have some form of spatial organization. So,
what about Duropolis in the Durotriges?
That's again, that's also a possibility. I think that not a lot of workers. The problem is that we tend to look a lot at the Roman level. We look at the Roman way of looking at it. But what we need to do is, the way to establish these things is to make sure that we have lots and lots of comparisons in order to actually be able to say that this is something, this is something. Because what you'll often get are I don't know. You'll get experiments in urban planning, or in certain times of vernacular architectural planning, or in vernacular settlements. There will be people that will try different things in order to inspire nucleated populations or something. Like, look at Fishbourne, for example. Fishbourne is completely out of normalcy from the rest of Roman Britain for much of the time. And yet, if all we knew was Fishbourne existed, if that's the only thing we ever found, we'd assume it was all like that. And I think it's important to just, regional variation is key. I think that's what it is. I think we're all agreeing. It's just, I love the term opida, but I've only ever read about it in Julius Caesar.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to have to bring that to a close, I think. Looking at the time, it's 20 to 10. So, one last comment from the digging gardener. Duropolis is an odd one. No contiguous defences, more just one large bank, visible as you ascend the hillside from the river valley.
That's a
I
really
don't
good
know
point.
it personally, so I'll take your word on that.
It's a really good point.
And a good point from Bill Free, and I'm going to do this, Bill. You're absolutely right. For future Zoom talks, although it's probably more Paddy because he just stirs up so much conversation, maybe get people to write question on a comment if it is a question.
Yeah.
And that's a very good idea. It makes life a lot easier for us. Thanks for that, Bill. We'll do that. Okay, that's it. I'm going to call
Thank
it
you
to
all
close.
so much. I've got to say to all of you, thank you for that really wonderful discussion as well. Some really interesting ideas and thoughts and everything else. I'm so full of Roman stuff. I've got to be honest, I'm kind of sick of the Romans tonight. But thank you all so much. That was so much fun. I really enjoyed that. That's the best evening you could have. I'll buy you all a beer.
I will definitely take you up on that one.
Capiamus Ceravisiam. Let's do this.
I just want to thank everybody who's still with us. There's 75 still hanging on. So thank you guys. And a biggest thanks to those who are still here, to those who made a donation tonight to help cover the costs of what we do.
It's never annoying. Sorry, the discussion is never annoying, Penny. That was wonderful. It's the best part of my job, is discussing people with their own idea and everything else. It's the best part of my job. It's how I learn. And I love it. It's been absolutely brilliant. It's been the best think tank I've had. It's like being on site, and it's the best compliment I could pay.
Okay. No, you're not sick of those Romans. The digging gardeners made that comment. I completely agree. You'll never be sick of them. It's your life, Paddy.
I'm not. I just desperately need something to eat. What it is.
Well, you didn't have time before the talk, did you? Right, I'm going to let you go and wind it all up. We usually, the volunteers behind the scenes I need to thank. So that's Dave Armstrong, Rob Entwistle, and Jeff Lunn.
Definitely.
Usual crowd. But thanks, guys. We have a little meeting afterwards, as you know, but you need to go and get something to eat. So
I'm good. I'm good if you want to chat. I'm good because I'd rather get it done in a one, and then I can just go and actually get changed. Because
we'll log out. Dave, if you can open up the meeting again immediately afterwards, that'd be great. So with that, I'm going to wish everybody who's still there a good night and hope to see you next month for the next talk.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I'll see you in a minute.
Cheers, Barry. Good night, everyone.